I never wanted to go in the first place. Let me take you back about 6 years. My wife had this idea that she really wanted to rent a secluded cabin in the woods. Camping was out of the question since a thin layer of fabric between us and nature wasn't her idea of fun. But a cabin, a sturdy wooden structure, was something she could handle. After weeks of convincing me how amazing it would be, I finally gave in. We planned what was supposed to be an unforgettable getaway in a rustic cabin. It took weeks of preparation, but eventually, we packed up our car and set out on the 6-hour journey to this remote retreat. The drive was 4 hours, followed by a rough 2-hour ride through the wilderness to reach the location. To be honest, she picked this place mainly for the photos she could take and post online. But when we arrived, it was nothing like what had been advertised. It was clear the place had once been picturesque, but time had not been kind. It had fallen into disrepair, neglected, and overall it was a disappointment. Things started off as you'd expect. My wife and I were not thrilled, but we were too exhausted from the trip to turn around and demand a refund for a 2-night stay. So we decided to just deal with it and go to sleep. That's when we noticed something I really wasn't okay with. The bed sheets looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. It's one thing for a place to be run down, but it's another for it to be filthy. Of course, when we checked our phones, there was no signal. Frustrated but with no other options, we stripped the sheets off and slept directly on the mattress. As you can imagine, it was an uncomfortable night. Not just because of the mattress or the disappointment, but because of the noises. I wasn't expecting it, but as I tossed and turned, I kept hearing sounds. It seemed like animals or something scurrying above us. The design of the cabin included a crawl space near the roof, but as far as I could tell, it wasn't connected to our actual living space. We had a flashlight with us. My wife, terrified and wanting no part in investigating, stayed in bed while I reluctantly got up to look around. I searched for some kind of hatch or opening that could explain the noises, but in all honesty, I wasn't too keen on running into a wild animal in the dark. After a thorough but anxious inspection, I found nothing. We decided the best course of action was to ignore it and try to get some sleep. The next morning, we got ready and set out for one of the breathtaking hikes my wife had promised would make the trip worth it. And to be fair, the hike itself was incredible even though we were running on little sleep. I'd recommend a deep nature escape to anyone at least once in their life. By the time we got back, we were completely drained, having spent nearly 7 hours exploring. We kicked off our shoes, laughing and joking as we entered the cabin, until we noticed something that instantly killed the mood. Our food, which had been neatly organized in the tiny kitchen, had been disturbed. There wasn't much of it, so it didn't take up much space. But now some of it was gone. The front door had been locked, even though the owner had said we didn't really need to lock it. But just to be safe from wild animals, we had done so anyway. And yet, despite that, someone had clearly been inside. It wasn't the messy work of a wild animal. Ripped bags, scattered food, bite marks. No, this was precise. Someone had carefully opened the packaging, making an effort not to make it obvious. But the problem was, we had counted on those granola bars for when we got back. 3 were missing, meaning there were only 3 left. We definitely noticed. That's when the fear set in. In our minds, it was obvious. Someone else was here. And then I remembered the noises from the night before. The pieces started falling into place. Could it be possible that some stranger was secretly living in this isolated cabin, and we had just stumbled into their home? That they had taken the chance to steal some of our food while we were gone? My stomach dropped. I didn't want to be there anymore. My wife and I spoke in hushed voices, afraid that whoever was lurking might be listening. It felt like we were being watched, like the walls had ears. I didn't know how far we'd have to drive to get a signal, but my nerves were shot. After a quiet discussion, we decided to leave as soon as possible. As we started packing up, I noticed something else was missing. My wallet. My entire wallet was gone. I was furious. Not only had someone helped themselves to our food, but now they had my wallet too. Where did they think they were going? It was a 2-hour drive to civilization. How would they even get anywhere? I had to confront them. We were almost certain they were hiding in the crawl space. But how would we get up there? My wife and I went outside and circled the cabin. That's when we found a small hatch at the back of the building. It was wedged open with a tiny stick. That confirmed it. Someone was up there. I took a deep breath and mustered the courage to open the hatch, flashlight in hand. Slowly, I pushed it open and shined the beam inside. What I saw made my skin crawl. In the corner of the cramped space, crouched in the shadows, was a small, rat-like man. He squinted and let out a sharp, almost squeaky noise when the light hit him. I won't lie, I nearly lost it, but I held my ground and shouted at him to toss my wallet back. I didn't care about the cash, he could keep it. I just wanted my ID and cards. To my shock, he actually threw it. It landed unceremoniously near the hatch. I snatched it up. It felt grimy and disgusting. Without wasting another second, my wife and I shoved everything into the car and sped off. Once we got enough signal, we called the cabin owner and told him everything. He was extremely apologetic, claimed he had no idea anyone was there, and promised to send authorities to investigate. We didn't ask for a refund. We didn't ask for anything. We just wanted to put as much distance between us and that place as possible. Even now, the thought of it sends shivers down my spine. The idea that someone had been living above us all night, watching us. God only knows what he could have done if he had wanted to. But the question that still haunts me to this day is this: how did he get inside if the door was locked? Did your town ever have any eerie tales? Like the one about the deserted house in the forest, or the haunted bridge where people claim to see spirits? Well, mine had the house legend. There was a story passed around when I was growing up that just west of the abandoned train depot stood a house deep in the trees, left to decay decades ago. The rumor was that some horrific crimes had been committed there long ago, and ever since, no one dared to return. But if no one had been back, how did they know what happened? That was something that fueled our young imaginations. At least it did for me. One summer, while my friends and I were bored out of our minds, the story resurfaced in my thoughts. There wasn't much to do in our quiet town of about 200 people. This was long before smartphones, and boredom was a daily battle. So we came up with a brilliant plan: we would go find the house. We were beyond excited, packing our bags with everything we thought we'd need to track it down. But in our eagerness, we lost track of time, and by the time we were ready, the sun had already set. The adventure would have to wait for morning. The next day, we met behind the old train depot and set off. A barely visible path led us into the woods. It might have been an old hunting trail, but it eventually disappeared into a clearing, leaving no indication of where to go next. Without a clear path, we decided to move in what we hoped was a straight line. One of my friends, always the cautious one, marked trees with chalk to ensure we could find our way back. A smart idea, but in a forest full of trees, I wasn't sure it would work. After about 2.5 hours of walking, doubts crept in. According to the legend, the house was supposed to be only an hour's trek away. We were starting to worry we had passed it entirely. When you're 16 and impatient, a hike with no promise of discovery can be crushing. We were close to giving up when one of my friends spotted what seemed to be a forgotten trail, slightly overgrown but still distinguishable. He was thrilled, pointing out a few rocks that looked deliberately placed. Following the trail, we walked for another 20 minutes before we finally stumbled upon it. The house. Our excitement skyrocketed. We had actually found it, this relic from town lore. The place where those terrible events had supposedly happened. One of my friends pulled out his camera and started snapping photos while we cheered. Now came the real challenge: getting inside. The house was sealed up tight, every window and door boarded over. We circled it, searching for a way in, but found nothing. Then one of my friends noticed a small window, possibly weak enough to break through. He grabbed at it and pulled. It swung open. The opening was narrow, too small for most of us, but our friend Evan was small and wiry, the perfect candidate. We shined a flashlight inside. The floor was dirt-covered, and in the distance we could see wooden stairs leading down. We reassured Evan that if anything went wrong, we'd pull him back up. He wriggled through, squeezing his shoulders past the frame, and once inside, made his way cautiously to the staircase. That's when we realized a problem. While Evan was inside, the rest of us were still locked out. The windows and doors were still boarded up, and he wasn't strong enough to pry them open from within. But luck was on our side. A small kitchen window had been loosely nailed shut, and with enough effort, we pried it open enough to climb in. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. Dishes sat in the sink, coated in thick layers of grime. Shoes were scattered around, as if the owners had left in a hurry. Decorations still hung on the walls, cloaked in dust. After searching the first floor, our attention turned to the second. The rickety staircase worried us. We feared it wouldn't hold our weight, so Evan, being the lightest, went first. Step by step, he tested each one. When he made it safely, the rest of us followed. Upstairs, there were only 2 rooms, neither of which looked like they'd been used in years. No blood stains, no signs of struggle. Odd, considering the house's reputation. Maybe the person who lived here had committed the crimes elsewhere. There were just old beds, worn-out clothes, and empty cabinets. While in one of the rooms alone, something shiny caught my eye from beneath the bed. I crouched down and saw a metallic object, its markings faded with time. As I reached for it, I heard a voice, unmistakably female, whispering 2 words into my ear. "Get out." I froze. There wasn't a single girl in our group. My blood ran cold as I looked around. No one was near me. I told myself it was just my imagination. I left the object where it was and hurried downstairs, slipping out through the kitchen window. I didn't want to be in that house any longer. One by one, my friends lost interest in exploring and followed me outside. We all agreed the place was unsettling. Before leaving, we did our best to wedge the loose window back into place, securing it as much as possible. Just enough for the next group of curious explorers to find their way in. As we walked away, I turned back for one last glance. That's when I saw it. In the upstairs window, in the very room I had been in, a face appeared, only for a second before vanishing against the wall. My heart pounded. I wasn't sure if I had really seen something or if my mind was playing tricks on me. None of my friends mentioned anything, so I kept quiet. Even now, I'm not certain what I witnessed. Was it a ghost? A trick of the light? I try not to dwell on it too much. That was years ago. But even today, I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was in that house with us. When I was 14 years old, we took a trip to visit my grandparents, who lived in a small cabin deep in the woods near a quiet little lake. The view in the morning was breathtaking. Since there was no internet, just an old TV from the early 2000s with only a handful of channels and a dusty DVD player, I decided to bring a friend along to keep me company. My grandmother was a big fan of horror movies, so she had a large collection of spooky DVDs. Now, on to the story. The cabin was about a 3-hour drive from the nearest town and nearly 7 hours from where we lived. The road trip itself was fun, and we arrived around 7:30 in the evening. My friend and I were thrilled to be there. The moment we pulled up, I threw open the car door and ran to hug my grandparents. They led us to the room where we'd be staying. It was upstairs, a spacious room with a single large bed, a bathroom, and a small balcony overlooking the lake. It was winter, and snow covered the ground, but I always get too warm at night, so I tend to crack open a window for some fresh air. I pushed our window open before heading downstairs to grab our bags. My dad handed us our luggage, and my friend took it up while I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for my grandmother to finish making hot chocolate. As we sat sipping our drinks, I asked if we could watch a movie before bed. She said yes, but told us to keep the volume down. After drinking our hot chocolate and taking quick showers, we noticed that my parents and grandparents had already gone to bed. My friend and I started looking through the DVD collection and settled on watching Friday the 13th. It was fun to have a movie night, and once it was over, we shut everything off and got into bed. The next morning, I woke up around 8 and rushed downstairs for breakfast. We were eager to go for a walk since it was a bright, sunny day, though the air was still chilly. We asked my grandparents and my dad if we could explore the trail near the woods. They agreed but told us to stick to the path. My grandmother even packed us a small bag with snacks and soda, just in case we got hungry. After finishing our breakfast, we headed out. The walk was peaceful, and we took our time, strolling through the snowy forest for nearly an hour. At one point, I sat down on a large rock to eat a snack, and my friend sat beside me. That's when we heard it. A strange, loud noise coming from somewhere up ahead. We exchanged nervous glances before getting up and walking toward the sound. A few steps later, we spotted something on the snow. Red stains. At first, I thought maybe a fox had caught a rabbit, so we kept walking. Then we heard a voice. "Hello? Is someone out there?" It was a girl calling for help. We turned toward the direction of the voice, but my friend suddenly hesitated, saying this felt wrong. I shrugged it off, assuming the girl must be lost. We kept walking, calling out, "Where are you?" in that carefree way kids do. Then we heard the voice again, and this time we ran toward it. In my haste, I tripped over a rock and landed face first in the snow. My friend laughed, but then she froze and pointed ahead. A small, rundown cabin stood in front of us. Curiosity got the better of us, so we decided to go inside. The moment we stepped in, a horrible smell hit us. Scattered across the floor were old shoes, clothes, and undergarments. There were plates with rotting food, and cobwebs clung to every corner. The place had clearly been abandoned for a long time. We cautiously moved through the cabin, peering into different rooms. That's when we found the worst one. Against the wall, heavy chains dangled. In the center of the room, there was an old bed with straps attached. Dried stains, what looked like blood, covered the walls and floor. We were about to run when we turned around and saw her. A girl stood in the doorway staring at us. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Help me." That was all it took. My friend and I bolted out of the cabin, running faster than we ever had before. We didn't stop until we were back on the main path. Neither of us spoke a word about what we had seen, afraid we'd get in trouble. That night, we tried to distract ourselves by watching movies, pretending everything was fine. By the time we went to bed, exhaustion from the long walk and all the excitement had caught up to us. But something woke me in the middle of the night. A scream. I sat up and saw my friend standing by the balcony. I asked her why she was yelling like that. Our parents would be furious. But she turned to me, her face pale. "It wasn't me," she whispered. "It was her. The girl by the lake." I got up and looked out the window. There, by the water, stood the same girl from the cabin. But she wasn't alone. Other girls were with her. They were all screaming. Terrified, I slammed the balcony door shut. We turned around and nearly jumped out of our skin. My dad and mom were standing in our room, asking why we were crying. Shaking, we told them everything. My grandmother walked in, listening closely. But when we described where we had seen the girl, her face went pale. She slowly sat down and sighed. "A long time ago," she said, "there was a man who did terrible things. He would take young girls and trap them in that cabin. No one knew what happened to them, but they were never found. Eventually, he was caught and locked away. But to this day, their bodies were never recovered. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it. Were they asking for our help? Or were they just lost souls, unable to find peace? No one deserves an ending like that." I went to summer camp with my friend Jake, and we ended up in the same cabin. We stayed awake late into the night until exhaustion finally took over. One evening, Jake and I sneaked into the kitchen and took a few packs of instant coffee. We mixed them with water and drank them before bed. Unlike me, Jake wasn't used to caffeine, so he stayed up after everyone else had fallen asleep. Curious, I asked him what he was doing. He told me he had brought a book and planned to read until he got tired. Everything was calm until around 1 a.m. when an ear-piercing scream shattered the silence. Jake was trembling inside his sleeping bag, tears streaming down his face. The entire cabin rushed over to see what had happened. His scream was so loud that if it hadn't already woken up the nearby cabins and staff, his uncontrollable sobbing afterwards certainly did. The camp counselors hurried in, and I stayed on my top bunk to avoid the chaos. "Jake," still shaken, stammered that he had seen a ghost wandering near our cabin. He also swore he had heard the sound of wind rushing as the figure moved. Another guy in our group hesitated before admitting that he had also heard something similar. The counselors decided to send Jake home the next day, but the rest of us stayed at camp. Even though everything seemed to go back to normal, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that lingered. When we got back home, Jake and I talked a lot about that night. He shared more details, and honestly, it unsettled me. Jake was one of the most truthful people I knew. He never made up stories. That night had clearly left him shaken. I briefly wondered if it could have been the caffeine messing with him, but we had some the night before and nothing like that happened. Plus, he drank coffee regularly despite it keeping him awake. He told me that when he first saw the ghost, he was too stunned to react. It was only visible for about 3 seconds, but that was enough to paralyze him with shock. The figure wasn't like something out of a movie. It was faint, barely there. But the scariest part was that it looked like a young boy. The boy wasn't dressed in anything modern. Instead, his clothes looked old-fashioned, like they were from another era. At first, Jake wasn't terrified, just frozen in disbelief. But the moment he screamed, everything changed. The ghostly boy turned to look at him, its hollow, empty eyes locking onto his. Then, in an instant, it darted out of the cabin. That was the whooshing wind sound both Jake and our cabin mate had heard. I still remember the way Jake described it. He said that for the brief second their eyes met, time seemed to stop. Even though it lasted only a moment, it felt like forever. He knew he wasn't imagining it because the eyes, those soulless, lifeless eyes, were burned into his memory. It was like whatever spirit that once existed inside the boy had long since been drained away. The way Jake told it gave me chills. I felt awful for him, and I don't think he'll ever go camping again. One weekend about 8 years ago, my wife, Lisa, and our 3 little boys at the time were staying at the family cabin we had bought about half a year earlier. From the very first day, we noticed flickering lights, shifting shadows, and strange movements in the place. Everyone went to bed around 10:30 p.m., and I went to the kitchen to sneak a bite of the homemade brownies my wife had baked earlier. As I was slicing off a piece, I suddenly heard a soft female voice whisper, "Hey, what are you doing in here?" It sent chills down my spine, and I instinctively called out, "Lisa?" without turning around. When I finally did look, there was no one there. Shaking it off, I resumed cutting the brownie when I heard an even clearer, slightly louder whisper, "Hey, are you gonna eat a brownie? I want one." Startled, I quickly scanned the kitchen, but no one was there. I bolted back to the bedroom and jumped into bed. My wife was still awake, obviously having been nowhere near the kitchen, let alone whispering about brownies. After about 10 minutes, I forced myself to return and clean up my mess, but thankfully, I didn't hear anything else. The following night, everything was quiet until I got into bed. Lying on my side, I suddenly felt a light tug on my sleeve. I turned my head and heard a hushed voice say, "Mom, Dad." I quickly got up and crossed the hall, only to find all 3 of my boys fast asleep. I also caught faint murmurs of words I couldn't quite understand. That night, I left a voice recorder running in the kitchen, but I still haven't gone through the recording. A part of me wonders if someone could have been whispering through the air vents, though considering our cabin sits on a nearly deserted road in the middle of nowhere, with only a few empty cabins nearby, it would have taken an enormous effort for some prankster to pull that off. But who really knows? On a related note, my close friend once told me a chilling story from when he was a kid. He had been sleeping at his own family's cabin when, in the middle of the night, a random woman, clearly intoxicated and possibly on drugs, staggered up in the dark and started whispering through the gaps in their wooden fence. He woke up to see a pale, eerie face just inches from him, murmuring softly through the slats. As you can imagine, it absolutely terrified him as a child, as it would any of us. This is my uncle's story. My mom and 2 older brothers would visit my aunt and 3 cousins around the holiday season. The entire family would come together, uncles, aunts, everyone. They lived up near a small town in the Scottish Highlands, in a region known as the Dark Isles. It was actually a place called Cremarin, but the closest well-known city was Inverness. There were old tales about the Dark Isles, saying that witches gathered there on Halloween for eerie rituals and animal offerings. Whether there was truth to these stories or not, no one really knew. Our family gathering was planned for a vacation house we had rented just a short walk from my cousin's home. It was spacious, with several bedrooms, making it perfect for all of us. I was sharing a room with my older brother and his friend from Ghana. They were both sound asleep, but I wasn't. I woke up suddenly, unsure why. My vision was hazy as I scanned the dimly lit room. The only sound was the steady breathing of my brother and his friend. Then the door creaked open. I was paralyzed with fear. Nothing seemed to step through, but when I strained my eyes to look around, I started noticing shadowy forms shifting and floating near the beds. There were at least 3 of them, 2 hovering over my brother and his friend, and 1 standing near me. These figures weren't human in any real sense, just vague outlines resembling people. Yet I could feel the one closest to me watching. Terrified, I made the only decision I could. I turned to face the wall and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I told a few family members what had happened. Most of them laughed, teasing me about old tales of witches in the area. But one person believed me, my brother's girlfriend. She had been sleeping in the next room and had her own unsettling experience. She told me she felt as if someone had sat at the foot of her bed during the night. She could even feel pressure on her legs. But when she looked, no one was there. Shaken, I decided to check the guest book to see if past visitors had recorded anything unusual. But there was nothing. I will never forget what I saw that night. And if you ever find yourself near the Dark Isles, or staying in that vacation home, be wary of shadowy figures entering in the dead of night. He tied the knot for the first time in his late 30s. For their honeymoon, he, his wife, and her daughter, a wonderful child with special needs, traveled to a cabin in the mountains of northern Arizona. After arriving, they unloaded their belongings, settled in, and prepared for a 3-day stay. On their last night, my cousin was up watching TV well past midnight. His wife and stepdaughter had already gone to sleep when he felt the need to use the restroom. He got up, walked to the bathroom, did his business, and stepped out. At that moment, the only light in the cabin was coming from the television in the living room. It was dim, but still bright enough to illuminate the entire living area and part of the hallway. As he opened the bathroom door, he saw his wife walking toward the kitchen. Assuming she had gotten up for a late-night snack, he decided to join her. He followed after her, but as she reached the end of the hallway, she turned slightly toward the kitchen, and then suddenly bolted inside at an impossible speed, far faster than any person could move. The figure was dressed in a long, flowing white nightgown, much like the one his wife had worn to bed, and had slightly past shoulder-length hair. Feeling unsettled, he took a step back, then peeked into the bedroom where his wife and stepdaughter were sleeping, only to find both of them sound asleep in bed. Unsurprisingly, he didn't get a wink of sleep after that. They packed up and left early the next morning. Later, he called the man who had rented them the cabin and said, "You never mentioned this place was haunted." The owner simply replied, "Oh, so you saw her, huh?" My cousin hadn't even said he had seen a woman, proving that the landlord already knew about the eerie, lightning-fast spirit haunting the place. He later admitted that if that thing had turned and made eye contact with him, he probably would have lost full control of his bowels right then and there. This isn't my story, but my friends who. I had just moved into my great-uncle's cabin, which he had left me after wrapping up a job call. On my second night, I had an incredibly vivid dream. In it, all my scars were gone, and I was married to my childhood love, the life I had once wished for. In the dream, we had a pet, specifically a lynx. The next morning, I woke up and saw a lynx in the woods, but its shadow was wrong. It was twice my height, had 2 hands, and its head was shaped like a pyramid. The following night, I dreamed of my mom making her well-known tofu and bell pepper dish. I ate it while watching an old sci-fi trilogy, with the lynx curled up on my lap. When I woke up and saw the creature again, I yelled at it. I told it that I could see through its tricks and that the only part of the dream that felt real was my mother. I had outwitted it, proving that it had been trying to deceive me. The next dream was a terrifying blur, though I was fully aware of it. I was attacked repeatedly by familiar faces, friends, and family. I never fought back, but I also never allowed the lynx to intervene. The dream that followed was even worse. The woods themselves turned against me, crushing my home and destroying my loved ones. For the first time, the creature spoke. "You will be my voice," it declared. "It is already decided. I can either bring fortune to your life and bloodline or curse every one of your descendants. The choice is yours." It waited for my response. I let the silence stretch. We sat across from each other for what felt like eternity. Then, I woke up to my friend shaking me frantically, telling me I had been unconscious for nearly 3 days. After that, the dreams continued, some depicting a perfect existence, others like the depths of a nightmare. The creature thrashed around inside my mind, restless, like a child upset that a caged bird refuses to sing. One day, while hunting geese, I encountered the lynx again. It didn't flee. Instead, it followed me deep into the woods. I knew these lands well, having hunted here long before moving in. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, I kept getting turned around, lost. The entire time, the creature trailed me. Finally, I cast aside all hesitation. I raised my rifle and shot it in the head. It nearly disintegrated, leaving only a thin strip of flesh dangling from its chest. It did not react, and after that, I never had another strange dream again. I used to go to a summer camp in a wooded area up north, where you'd spend 1 week doing activities with a group of kids and the next week on a canoe trip. I slept on the top bunk in the far corner of a cabin that had about 5 sets of bunks, all occupied. The counselor had their own bed behind a curtain off to the side. One night, sometime between 1 and 3 in the morning, I woke up to a strange noise. I glanced over and saw a hunched-over figure standing in the middle of the cabin, its shape outlined by the dim moonlight. It was short, maybe around 5 feet tall, with a narrow, pointed face, long fingers, and oddly shaped feet. It looked like some kind of goblin. It moved slowly, sniffing around each of the kids sleeping on the bottom bunks. I was paralyzed with fear. I don't think it realized there were kids sleeping on the top bunks. After what felt like forever, it quietly opened the door and stepped outside. As it left, it knocked over a fire barrel on the way out. That was when I heard the counselor stir and call out to be careful of the barrel. Way too late to be any help. It was at that moment I realized the counselor had been in bed the whole time. To this day, I'm in my late 30s, and I still feel like that thing was looking for a kid who was awake. What for, I have no idea. There have always been stories of children going missing in certain places, so I don't know what to think. All I know is I never went back. Any thoughts? I'm not a skeptic. I've seen ghosts before, but I'd love to hear what anyone thinks that thing could have been. That happened to be a camping trip where a bunch of his buddies rented a lodge in Yellowstone to stay for 3 nights. On my first evening there, I noticed something strange in the room my cousin and I were sleeping in. As soon as we got under the covers, the ceiling began making loud creaking sounds. It felt like someone was pacing back and forth above us. I brushed it off as the building settling due to the cold or maybe small animals moving around on the roof and went to sleep. By the 3rd night, though, it was obvious that there was more to it than just natural causes. That evening, I went to bed early while the others were still up, chatting, drinking, and playing cards. Like clockwork, the creaking noises kicked in again. I tried to ignore them just as I had before. But then, one of the decorative copper panels on the wall started making a tapping and scraping sound. I had no logical explanation for it. Normal expansion from temperature changes and other reasonable ideas couldn't account for that. Still, I was exhausted, so I turned over in bed and forced myself to tune it out. That's when I felt something grab my wrist. Keeping my voice low, I muttered, "Nope," deciding I wasn't about to deal with any wandering spirit. Within moments, I heard the creaking shift to the ceiling of the room down the hall. I was around 8 or 9 at the time. A few friends and I were out hiking along some trails near Blue Ridge, Georgia. We decided to follow some animal paths off the main trail, just to see where they might lead. About an hour into following these trails, we realized it was time to head back. But after making so many twists and turns, we soon figured out we were lost. We started moving in what we thought was the general direction of the main trail when we stumbled upon a small clearing with an old, crumbling cabin. Of course, being young and reckless, we couldn't resist checking it out. The front door was barely hanging on and completely fell off when we tried to push it open. Parts of the wooden floor gave way as we walked, making every step a risk. Inside, there was a filthy, mold-covered mattress that had nearly rotted away, random dishes scattered everywhere, and in one of the rooms what looked like a very old radio, the kind you'd expect from decades ago. In another part of the cabin, we found the fully decomposed remains of what we assumed was either a dog or a coyote. After looking around for a while, we decided it was best to get back to the main trail before it got too dark so we could set up camp and avoid getting even more lost. Since then, we've tried to find the cabin about 5 different times, but strangely, we've never been able to locate it again. Down the road from the old battlefield, most nights while everyone was fast asleep, I could hear a woman softly humming. I was the only woman in the house. Back then, I slept on the couch, and more than once, I felt like something was slamming into it with full force. My suspicions were confirmed when, one day, I heard voices outside my front window. I peeked out and saw the local ghost tour stopped on my porch, talking about my house. I never paid attention to what they were saying, but the whole thing was unsettling. I don't know if it's as terrifying as other ghost stories, but it really gave me chills. It left me wondering what on earth had happened in my cabin or on this land before I ever lived here.